How you doing, Mr. Blankenship? ABC News. Hey, sir. Don't touch my camera. Let me. Hey, let go of me. Let go of me, sir. Let go of me. Let go of me. I'll get off the property.
The saga over the West Virginia Supreme Court and Massey Energy CEO Don Blankenship continues to receive national attention. And for the first time, we hear from the former girlfriend of Chief Justice Spike Maynard, who was in the French Riviera when these pictures of Maynard and Blankenship were taken.
Oftentimes, as most women do, excuse myself at the end of a meal to go to the restroom. So I honestly can't say who paid for the meal.
Also on tonight's Outlook, we'll talk to organizers of a rally dubbed the Hillbilly Express. Last week, many truckers drove to Charleston to protest high fuel costs. And as part of our science series, Lab 304, we'll look at an effort to make modular homes both green and affordable. First, more on the latest scrutiny of the West Virginia Supreme Court. ABC News and the program Nightline focused on the controversy surrounding Massey Energy CEO Don Blankenship and the West Virginia Supreme Court. Reporter Brian Ross addressed the 2004 election, in which Blankenship spent more than $3 million in efforts to elect Justice Brent Benjamin. And he addressed the relationship between Chief Justice Maynard and Blankenship, especially the time they spent together in the French Riviera, while a $50 million verdict against Massey was pending appeal to the Supreme Court. With interest, the verdict had grown to $76 million by the time it reached the Supreme Court. Maynard told ABC News there was nothing improper about meeting up with Blankenship while both were vacationing in the region.
As long as it doesn't affect the case, it's no different than spending time with him in Charleston, West Virginia. We've had lunch and dinner publicly in Charleston, and so what's the difference? It's a different location, that's all. I think he bought a dinner, I bought a dinner. And that's the only thing. I think we each bought a dinner.
Joining us now is Anna Sale, who's been following this controversy and the Supreme Court election. Anna, first, did we learn anything new from this piece?
Not much. I would say most of it has already been covered by the West Virginia media and by other national media outlets. As you indicated earlier, we heard for the first time from the former girlfriend of Chief Justice Spike Maynard. She basically said she didn't know who paid for the meals because she was away from the table when the bill came. And we also heard from Spike Maynard that he and Don Blankenship each bought each other meals. He previously said that he'd not accepted anything from Don Blankenship, but he told ABC News that he thought he bought one meal and Blankenship bought another meal.
One of the reasons the story received a lot of advanced publicity was because of the run-in that Mr. Blankenship had with the ABC News videographer in Belfry, Kentucky.
Yeah, and that footage was very prominent in the piece. Producer Brian Ross addressed that in an interview with the local ABC affiliate, WCHS-TV. He basically said, this is not ambush journalism, this is what you have to do to try to get important public figures to address questions.
Do you feel that sometimes that this kind of ambush interview is the only way to get a story, or is there always other ways around it?
Well, I don't know if you'd call it an ambush. We didn't jump out of anything. Sometimes with public figures like Blankenship or Chief Justice Maynard, just because they say no, they don't want to talk, doesn't mean we won't try to ask them important questions. And I think in this case, these are very important questions. Justice Maynard agreed to sit down and talk with us. Justice Starcher did. Justice Maynard's former girlfriend agreed to talk with us. Everybody in this story, except for Blankenship, agreed to speak with us, which we think makes for a better story. We wish that Blankenship had agreed to do an interview with us. I think it would have made the story better. But even so, we can tell it. We have his point of view. But for television, we like to have people sit down and talk with us in a sort of a calm, rational manner.
And WCHS-TV was also able to talk to Don Blankenship this week, who gave a different account of the run-in with the ABC producer. He basically said he reacted like he did because he assumes that the media is going to be liberal, and that's why he reacted the way he did.
Yeah, I think the approach of just showing up on someone's private property, particularly given the things I've been through the last 20 years, is not the way to approach it. It's not professional, and it's also not respectful of the person they're trying to interview. Well, quite frankly, I think you know that the media, when they come in, are going to be on the liberal side, and you obviously look at that question as an assumption that you're doing something improper. But everything I've done, as I've told ABC in a note, has been above board, very transparent. People know how much money I've spent. They know what side of the issues I'm on.
Both Justice Maynard and Don Blankenship say there was nothing wrong with their get-togethers in the French Riviera. If that's the case, then why did Justice Maynard recuse himself from the case at issue?
Justice Spike Maynard has been consistent throughout, saying he did nothing improper. What he said back in January when he recused himself from the first Massey case, he's recused himself since several times from Massey issues before the court. He basically said that the standard is the appearance of impropriety, not impropriety itself. So because there was the appearance of impropriety, he would remove himself from dealings with Massey.
In the ABC News story, Justice Larry Starcher came off as an example of judicial integrity in a way, but he's had his own problems with this case. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, Justice Larry Starcher has also had faced a number of motions to recuse himself from Massey Energy cases before the court. He has recused himself from one case that was just decided. What is at issue there are public statements that Justice Larry Starcher has made about Massey. He's called Don Blankenship a clown. He's talked about the way that he believes Don Blankenship bought a seat on the Supreme Court, referring to Justice Brent Benjamin. He said that in the ABC News piece, and he also told West Virginia Public Broadcasting that back in 2004. So Massey has pointed to all those public statements saying, you can't this justice cannot treat us fairly. Justice Larry Starcher has recused himself one time in a second Massey case that's a big, over $200 million verdict before the case. Initially, Starcher called a public hearing on the question of whether or not he should recuse himself. Just today, Wednesday, he canceled that when the Supreme Court denied Massey's request to overrule Starcher. Basically, the court said, we won't overrule Starcher's call of a public hearing, and Starcher canceled the hearing itself.
Interesting. Well, moving on, of course, there's a Supreme Court election underway, and last Friday, candidates filed the first campaign finance reports. So what do those reports reveal in regard to the Supreme Court election?
I was really interested to see these because in the midst of all this controversy and attention, there's campaigns going on. So number one, I wanted to see if Justice Spike Maynard had been affected in any way in the fundraising based on these pictures. And what I found is not only has he raised the most of any candidate that's running for the Supreme Court, the fundraising, he raised about half before these pictures came out and about half afterwards. So it doesn't look like these European vacation photos have affected his ability to raise money. And the people who are giving money to Spike Maynard's re-election effort run the political gamut. It's trial attorneys, what you think would be on the left, to the Chamber of Commerce and business interests on the right. So it looks like there is a broad base of support for Spike Maynard's re-election. In terms of the other candidates, Margaret Workman has the most money in the bank, but she's also raised the least. A lot of her money comes from a $600,000 loan she made just at the end of March to her campaign.
And Margaret Workman is a former Supreme Court justice.
That's right.
Anna Sale, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Well, some of these issues are bound to come up in an upcoming Supreme Court debate that will be televised on West Virginia PBS. All 5 Supreme Court candidates will participate in the debate, which you can see Sunday, April 20th at 7 p.m. West Virginia Public Radio will also air this debate on Tuesday, April 22nd at 9 p.m.